Good evening. Thank you for attending tonight's presentation, which is part of the Roland Quest Lecture Series. The Roland Quest Lectureship was established in 1996 and honors Elmhurst alumnus Roland Quest, class of 1936. Quest was a former McDonnell Douglas engineer who performed design work on the original space shuttle. True to Quest's character, the Quest Lectureship brings new ideas and outstanding speakers to the Elmhurst campus and contributes to the intellectual vitality of both the college and community. As part of this lectureship series and others, we've had many notable speakers present at Elmhurst College over the years, including Martin Luther King, George McGovern, Edward Kennedy, Ralph Nader, Sandra Day O'Connor, and just this year, Richard Florida and Bill Nye. Tonight, I am pleased to introduce Chris Hughes. It is a pleasure for Elmhurst College to host him. The title of the talk is Brave New Media World. For me, the title of the talk evokes thoughts of Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World. Communication and media theorist Neil Postman, in an appropriately titled book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, reminds us that Huxley did not fear a future where people would ban books or newspapers. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book or newspaper, for no one would want to read. As Huxley saw it, no political or corporate entity could deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, or history because we'd come to love our oppression, to adore the technology that undoes our ability to think. But what if Huxley had it wrong? What if, in the long run, technology and social media can save books and print media? Chris Hughes has been advancing this very argument. According to him, social networking and the internet can help develop high-quality journalism and make it more accessible than ever before. If anyone can win this argument, perhaps it is Chris Hughes. He is the quintessential archetype of a Horatio Alger's tale. He is the son of a paper salesperson and a school teacher. While at Harvard, from which he graduated with honors in 2006, he co-founded the social networking site called Facebook. In April 2009, the cover story of Fast Company said that he was the kid who made Obama president for the work he did on the company's website. It is his most recent venture, however, that brings Chris to the stage tonight, and for which we should all be hoping that he's successful given Aldous Huxley's predictions. Chris Hughes purchased the New Republic, often referred to as TNR, in 2012. He is currently the magazine's editor-in-chief. TNR has been an important source of liberal commentary on politics and the arts for exactly 100 years. Like other magazines and news sources, it is under threat from changes in technology and cultural tastes, which have seemingly driven people from long-form print journalism to whatever. The fact is tragic, I think. It is exactly this type of media we need when culture and politics are at such great odds, as they seem to be, obviously, today. Long-form magazines like TNR provide thoughtful analysis when few other sources of information seemingly do. So I hope that Chris is correct in his assumption that he can save TNR. On behalf of Elmhurst College's students, faculty, and administration, I am pleased to welcome Chris Hughes to speak to our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig, and thanks, Desiree and Peggy, and pretty much everyone here at Elmhurst for having me here tonight. It's a real privilege to be here. So I want to get started with what many of you may already be thinking, or maybe at least it's one of the first questions that I get quite a lot of the time. And it's true. Yes, I am in the movie. I am played by one Patrick Maple. If you don't know the name, don't feel bad. He's not exactly an A-list actor, not yet. He doesn't say very much in the film. In general, he sort of loafs around, wears his pajamas, occasionally watches some television. And you'll be disappointed to know that that's not actually what I did while I was in college. And it turns out the movie doesn't get every detail quite right. Believe it or not, Hollywood tends to reimagine these moments in a way that makes it a little bit more entertaining than it was in reality. Contrary to what Aaron Sorkin would have you believe, we didn't actually live in a luxury apartment in the middle of Harvard Square. And I don't know, it's been a couple years now, but a few scenes still tend to stick out in people's minds. There was, in fact, no sex in bathrooms, no alcohol-fueled hackathons, at least to my knowledge, that I did not participate in. And maybe most importantly, I can tell you that the idea for Facebook was not really stolen from two Greek-like Olympians who were known as the Winklevi now in popular culture. All that, not so much. For all that, though, the movie does get one important thing right about the history of Facebook, and it's perhaps the most important thing about the film. Facebook is the defining example of American ingenuity and entrepreneurship in the 21st century. And I want to preface my talk about some of the virtues of American entrepreneurialism with a few important qualifications. We clearly live in a time of immense challenge for our country. As we all know, our political conversations in Washington have turned into a deadlock at best. We're just now emerging from an economic crisis that was the worst since the Great Depression, thanks to some of these complex financial instruments that Wall Street invented. We're just now getting around to providing all of our citizens with health care, which turns out is one of the most controversial things that we've done in decades somehow. And unfortunately, we can't seem to get big things done on things like climate change and immigration, even though there's a massive consensus in the country that these are urgent problems that need to be addressed. All that said, one thing that we do get right, and which is an enduring facet of the American experience, is entrepreneurship. It's one of the most important attributes that I would argue is at the core of our national identity, and it's defined our economy for the last 150 years, if not longer. We have a near universal respect for the upstart, for the person who takes a small idea and believes that she or he can make it big. I've been fortunate to have played a part in one of the most well-known contemporary stories of American entrepreneurship, and that obviously is the story of Facebook. Today, Facebook has just over 1.2 billion active monthly users. 10 years ago, and it's been about 10 years now, just last month, we were just a group of diverse, independently minded college kids with an idea. Now, a lot's been written about the personalities that were behind Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg, Dustin Moskovitz, and I were all roommates in Kirkland House, age 33. But few of the tellings of the Facebook founding story tend to talk very much about the unique opportunities that we had access to or the culture that we were a part of. So rather than tell you more about the personalities, probably many of which you already know, I'd rather talk a little bit about the environment that Facebook emerged from and what made it possible for us to, for Facebook to be created and thrive. First off, the world around us expected us to think big, be ambitious, and take risks. And I think this is good advice for anybody, particularly in a room of young people like I see out there tonight. Harvard has no monopoly on creating a culture of big expectations or excellence. It can exist anywhere. It's particularly pervasive there, but it's one of the biggest and most important ingredients when it comes to creating a successful entrepreneurial venture. You combine those expectations for success and ambition with a new wave of information technology that's emerged in the past few years that enables anyone to spend a matter of days or weeks building an application and immediately have access to a global market of nearly 2 billion active internet users. This culture where ambition and excellence meets the tools to actually reach an enormous market is in full bloom in 2014 in a way that it has never been before in human history. So if desire to succeed at scale was the first ingredient, it was by no means sufficient. A second key ingredient was the diversity that we had in our dorm room in Kirkland House. Now, while we were all white men, but our similarities stopped there. Mark was interested in computer science and psychology. Dustin had studied economics and the science of collaboration and management. And I was the empath, as they said, interested in the way technology and people interface and how product and design can be improved. So you take determination, you add to it diversity, but you still need a key third ingredient, which we were able to find in the summer of 2004. Capital, financial investment. Peter Thiel, who is a former PayPal co-founder and a startup investor, took a chance on us, and it was a big chance. He invested $500,000 to fuel the initial stages of Facebook's growth at a very important early moment when our idea was incredibly nascent. Without that money, and without somebody taking a chance on us, not only would Facebook have not been able to flourish, but it's reasonable to suggest that it would have been chalked up to the annals of just another college social network, as there were many other. Facebook would have never happened without these personalities and these key ingredients. I would argue that not all startups need all of these, but most need many. In 2014, we continue to see the proliferation of new social networks, and more time is spent inside of apps and on the mobile and social web. In fact, the digitization of our daily lives is radically changing almost every industry and social practice that's out there. But the one that I think about the most these days, and the one that I'm excited to talk a little bit more about tonight, is the news and media landscape. About 10 years ago, half of Americans read a print newspaper yesterday when polled by the Pew Research Center. Today, that number has dropped in half, just over the course of a decade. Meanwhile, everyone wonders if quality media with a print heritage, if you will say, newspapers and magazines, are going to be able to survive on the web, where people seem to be more interested in BuzzFeed quizzes and numbered lists than what happened in Syria yesterday. But before grappling with this and trying to hazard a few answers, I think we have to face the question, why does it matter anyway? Why do we really need this good journalism? Isn't it just a factor of nostalgia for days that have gone by? And why do we even need to care if people read the news? So I want to try to answer that with a story. Back in August 1946, Harold Ross, who was the founding editor of The New Yorker, made an unprecedented decision. He decided to devote an entire issue of his magazine, an entire issue, all of the content in a single edition of the magazine, to a single story. Hiroshima, by John Hersey, follows the lives of 6 people who survived the world's first nuclear attack. It begins in the morning of August 6th, before the bombs fell, and narrates the nightmare of that day through each subject's eyes. Before that groundbreaking issue of The New Yorker, the only accounts of the bombing had been traditional, dispassionate news stories. But Hersey's piece, which I encourage you all to read, is close lens, personal, and frankly, unflinchingly gruesome. And it forced readers to imagine how the blast felt to the people on the ground. With that single piece of journalism, the unprecedented horror of the attack across the Pacific Ocean entered the homes of an English-speaking audience. The body counts of headlines, which even today were all very easy to take in stride, became real faces and real stories of everyday people just like you and me. He didn't just offer another record of that apocalyptic day. He gave voice to the suffering, and in doing so, asked fundamental questions about what we owe our enemies, even in time of war, and how to think about the human capacity for technological achievement and inexpressible destruction. In my view, this is what good journalism and great writing does. It helps us see all the world. It helps us see the world in all its glory and gore a little more clearly, and asks us as individuals big ethical questions in the process. The impressions that we take away from the stories we read shape our perspectives on the world and the reality that we live in. Headlines come and headlines go, but great journalism tells memorable stories about the most important topics of our time. Journalism isn't about a bland headline and a she said, he said. It's how we know what matters, and it's what we use, all of us as citizens and everyday people, it's what we use to make the decisions that count. It was for these reasons that almost 2 years ago, not quite, that I bought The New Republic. It's actually 2 years ago this month. This was before Jeff Bezos and Pierre Omidyar and a lot of the other tech folks started the trend of investing in important media institutions. And so as a result, everybody asked me, what the hell are you thinking? You come from the world of digital. You come from the world of innovation and creativity. Why are you going backwards? It seems like you're trying to move into history and into the past rather than thinking about the future. But I take the opposite approach. I think that institutions like the New Republic, which has been around for 100 years, have important historical heritages and a reason for being that can't be ignored and can't be discounted in the century that comes. Now, my personal journey to the New Republic wasn't a particularly romantic one. I discovered it in my early 20s in a period of obsession with the journals, reviews, and magazines that make up the general world of American letters. And in a world with a lot of bloated books and truncated social media messages, thoughtful, long-form writing about timely issues in politics and culture and the world of ideas brought a certain allure to myself and I think for many other people in my generation. Among the titles that I discovered in those years, some were vehicles for a certain ideology. They had a set calcified group of beliefs, and every single edition that rolled off the presses was really just a repetition of those same ideas. And others were wonderful reads, but for a very niche, very specific kind of audience. But the New Republic in particular was anything but predictable. Fiery arguments, refined feature writing, and earnest criticism have made the print and digital pages of this institution as lively and entertaining as they've been informative and influential. But the conventional wisdom of today would tell you that serious journalism, the type of writing that was contained in the essay on Hiroshima or in countless editions of the New Republic, has little chance of being successful. The conventional wisdom is, it's over. Long-form, contextualized, thoughtful storytelling is not what the young folks crave, they say. People don't want nuance, they don't want narrative. They want blog posts. They want things fast. They want tweets. They want Facebook posts. They want anything they can scan and absorb in an instant. And the cynics would have you really believe that no one reads anymore, no one really cares, and this golden age of journalism, when the business models and the audience uniquely aligned, has actually passed. It turns out, like with most things, the reality is much more complex. There is no doubt that journalism has been mightily transformed by the internet and social media, but it's not always in the way that we expect. I want to talk about four main effects of the rise of social media on journalism that I argue are actually creating a stronger, more interesting, broader, and more inspiring field. The first major effect will come as an enormous shock. The way that people discover content is increasingly through social networks. Social networks now drive nearly 50% of the traffic on most sites, which is no big surprise when you consider that most people spend 7 hours a month on Facebook alone. More and more of our time online is spent inside these networks, interacting with friends, chatting about the news of the day or what people have done over the weekend. But we also share and track the content that our friends have highlighted, that our friends find interesting. When you combine these social networks, and it's of course not just Facebook, it's Twitter, it's Reddit, it's Dig, there's a whole family of these. When you combine them with email, which you can think of as a private social network of sorts, you see that half of the traffic coming to news and media sites originates from social sources, including for us at the New Republic. This is a fundamental shift in the way that people read online. In the first phase of the internet, many of the publications that existed for a long time came online and were digitized. And we as consumers tended to go to the same institutions that we had gone to very much before. This was the era when the homepage was incredibly important because that was the front door through which the vast majority of traffic came. In 2014, for many of us, our home pages are either our email inboxes, our Facebook news feeds, our Twitter feeds, or whatever is the closest app to us on our phone. And as a result, the traffic that comes to news sites needs to be so much more social friendly, needs to be ready to be not only consumed through these social networks, but more importantly, shared so that it can reach a larger and larger audience. The effect of this is this social-friendly journalism has become more prolific than ever. So what makes a particular article social-friendly? Well, some of these kinds of pieces you'll recognize immediately. The first is arguably, some people would say it's journalism, some people would say it's entertainment. The folks at BuzzFeed would tell you it's somewhere between the two. But this kind of piece does incredibly well on social media. 30 signs, you're almost 30. For someone who just turned 30 a few months ago, this was sent to me several times and got several page views from me alone. These kinds of pieces tend to tap into something and say something about who you are and give you a reason to share it, to pass it along to a friend, to post it on, as part of your social media feed. You can argue that this isn't journalism as it was traditionally done, but this is the same institution that is doing this kind of journalism, BuzzFeed, has correspondents now on the ground in the Middle East, in Syria and Ukraine, and much of this work is actually what's powering and making their model possible. Another example are outrageous, uplifting, inspiring videos of all sorts. A company that I'm on the board of and an investor in is Upworthy. And it has it's been a rocket ship in terms of traffic. It didn't exist just about a year and a half ago. And it now has nearly 100 million unique visits a month. Their innovation is finding meaningful content, most often videos. It's not exclusively videos, but it's most often videos, and then packaging them in a certain way that makes you as a viewer or as a potential sharer someone who wants to click, read, watch, and then pass along. This was one of the most powerful examples of their content last year. For those of you who can't see, it says, "See why we have an absolutely ridiculous standard of beauty in just 37 seconds." This video was, what it shows, unfortunately I can't play it, but it shows a photo of a beautiful woman that then goes through an insane process of airbrushing, and she's turned into someone who looks more like a Barbie doll than an actual human. And you can see that all of these images of body types and of expectations of what we're supposed to look at are actually engineered by so many people in the world and in the media. And this one video got tens of millions of views thanks to Upworthy's packaging of it. And I would argue tells an important story for the world in general, and is a new kind of journalism that exists in 2014. Yet another kind of piece that does well on social networks are what we call snackable content. So these are maps, these can be charts, or even just headlines that tell a story. This is an example. This is from PolicyMike.com, and the headline reads, "Mesmerizing maps of where people jog reveal something odd. A city's rich and poor neighborhoods." And so what they've done is they've used data that comes from an open source, so anyone has same access to the data, and they've actually been able to map where people go for runs and see that people go for runs in rich neighborhoods in cities. I think this says something fundamentally important about how we build our cities, about safety, about crime, and a reminder that the parts of the cities that are safe, that many people run in and jog in, are only a fraction of the actual location that people live in. Another example, and this is the final one in this series, are definitive takes. Believe it or not, definitive takes do incredibly well on social media. On this, I can speak from personal experience. This is the New Republic's last cover story. It's a big cover story on Chris Christie's career and actually unpacking work that he had done in New Jersey and so many of the questionable relationships that he built over the course of the career, arguing that the bridge controversy that came out over the past few months is really just the tip of the iceberg. This story alone got over 500,000 page views. It's 5,000 words. It's incredibly in-depth, well-researched. It's written in a prose style, if you will, a traditional style, but it still did incredibly well on social media. In fact, for us, if you look at the top 10 most trafficked pieces of the past year, 6 of them are long-form print stories of at a length of nearly 5,000 words on average. We also have tools that enable us to go in and see actually how far did people get on these stories. Were they just clicking on it because it was a clever headline or it was a timely story, or was this something that they were really interested in? If you do that on this story and others, you find that over half of the people who read it get to nearly halfway through, 2,000 to 2,500 words. We have hard, clear evidence that not only do people want to read serious, thoughtful, long-form content on the web, they actually are willing to spend meaningful amount of time with it. Now, all these kinds of journalism are generally very new, except for this last category. They emerge from the article as the original form, but they'd be almost identifiable if seen elsewhere in print. At the New Republic and at other institutions that are moving quickly to adapt, we're constantly experimenting with new ways of storytelling, while we're also careful not to let go of what's worked for the past century. A second major change that all the social networks and the explosion of mobile access have done is they've made moments of downtime, and by downtime I mean standing in a line, on a subway, the 3 minutes before a class or a meeting begins. They've made them actually useful and a time when we can consume more content. The total amount of journalism that we are consuming is actually increasing, even in a period where the print products are decreasing. And they're proliferating because content can now seep into just about any corner of our day if we want it to. Ironically, the rise of the mobile phone and mobile apps has actually made it easier to read long form than it has ever been before. You, of course, see the emergence of apps like Instapaper and others, but the constraints of the smaller screen make it more likely for people to continue to scroll and for people to get engrossed in a particular piece that they're reading. Another study just came out last year which looked at how often do young people read books. And it came to some pretty surprising conclusions. If you were under 30, firstly, you were just as likely to have read a book as you were historically, and you were actually more likely to have read a book than people who were older. And the second surprising conclusion is you were just as likely to have read a book on your phone as you were in print. Just as likely to have read a book on your phone as you were in print. And people from a lot of older generations say, how is that possible? How do you read on that tiny screen? How are you actually reading a book? And it's because it's keyed into the cloud. It's keyed into Kindle or iBooks or any of these other products. And all those 3-minute interludes during a day that were previously lost have now been regained. And people, including myself, actually try to take advantage of those and spend time reading and learning more with books, with long-form journalism, with all different kinds of things that are out there. The third major change is that the explosion of narrative and storytelling techniques that are available to everyday people. Graphs, maps, and charts bridge the gap between a world of 5,000 word pieces over here that are interesting to a smaller subset of people and a much larger number of people who are curious and want to learn more. You can just think of how many new news products have emerged over the past decade. You have email newsletters that have been popularized by Politico or the Huffington Post, which hundreds of thousands of people get in the mornings or in the evenings and aggregate the major headlines of the day. You have slideshows, you have online videos, you have audio that's also available on your phone that comes from places like The Economist, or we do audio as well, that enable you to consume the previously just print media while you're on the go. All of these are new forms that didn't exist and make it easier for people to learn in the moments that are most convenient for them. The final major change I would suggest from the emergence of social media is that there's more information in real time from halfway across the world that gives enormous opportunity to journalists and makes the news itself more and more accessible to everyday people. So you take a moment like today in the Ukraine. It's true that newspapers, magazines, we all have fewer foreign bureaus than we've ever had before. But there's so much information that's immediately accessible through many of these social networks that it's not that we just need more information and more of the raw material. We still have the important task of having journalists parse what's true from what's false and explain what's the most important thing to read or to understand. But in many cases, they can do that from their own homes or their offices here in Chicago, in New York, or in Washington, or wherever they may be. You see this today with the events that are happening in Ukraine, but you also see it in Venezuela, in Egypt historically, in many places across the world. To be sure, I'm not saying that we no longer need foreign correspondents. There's nothing like having boots on the ground in a foreign place to understand the heartbeat of a culture or a revolutionary moment or something that's going on. What I'm saying is that as there are fewer and fewer people there are more and more opportunities for parsing these activities, for being able to see in real time what's happening on the other side of the world and provide a reinterpretation or analysis from here at home. These are monumental changes to the field which change the very nature of the journalism that we practice. And don't get me wrong, not all of these things are a good thing for our journalism. One enormously concerning effect of social media journalism is the emergence of what's been called a filter bubble. We increasingly tend to surround ourselves with content on topics that we like from perspectives similar to our own. Not only do we find ourselves listening almost exclusively to others who share our ideology and worldview, we start to think that other perspectives don't exist, or they've fallen out of favor. Our ability to insulate ourselves from the challenging or unpleasant is addictive, and it's corrosive, not only to our minds, but to our polity. If we only look to our Facebook feed rather than to the front page or the nightly news, this will be increasingly the case. If we only go to social media, most of us are likely only to hear the people who agree with us, who reinforce many of our own opinions, rather than people who take a different position. For this reason, I think it's incredibly important that we all set practices to make sure to listen to people who disagree. I challenge all of you to follow people on Twitter who you know have different opinions than you have. Subscribe to publications which might have a different orientation than you as well. There's no way to solve this problem in an easy technological fashion. It's going to take a commitment on all of our parts to be open-minded to alternative ideas, and not only to think about them when they find their way to us, but to proactively go out, seek them, and engage with them. I want to end before opening up to some questions with a short anecdote about entrepreneurship and innovation in this same world of media and journalism. But this story doesn't come from 2014. It actually comes from 1922. In that year, two 24-year-old newspapermen pitched an idea for a magazine, a new magazine, to potential investors, most of whom were their former professors or the parents of their college friends. Now, they claimed this magazine would be unlike anything that had come before. It would be even better than the Literary Digest, which was the leading periodical of the day. It would replace the Digest's staid language with lively description and sizzling wit. And where the Digest had a penchant for frivolity, this new invention would aggregate all the most important news into short pieces that fit the lifestyles of a highly educated, ambitious readership. It would take advantage of the technologies of its day, printing enticing imagery in readable layouts, abandoning the dense, boring columns that appeared, or they would say boring, that appeared on the covers of its competitors. Quote, "No publication has adapted itself to the time which busy men are able to spend on simply keeping informed," they wrote in their pitch. They lived in a time when the prevailing wisdom was sort of like our own. It was that everyone was too busy to read, that new technologies were making traditional news obsolete, and that new forms of aggregation and presentation would usher in a new era for news. It's amazing sometimes to think about how much changes and how much doesn't. Much of the literary community of the time disdained the young men's idea of condensing the news and infusing it with creative language, or thought they couldn't take on the digest. A former president of Harvard told them that the project was disgusting and disgraceful. But they refused to be deterred. Instead, they spent every free minute trying to figure out how to make the world understand their vision, how to brand their idea. Would they call the magazine a newspaper, a periodical? Nothing seemed quite right until one proposed hyphenating two words that had never been combined before: news magazine. And it worked. The publication they launched in 1923 was called Time, the weekly news magazine. And it brought together important current events and vibrant storytelling as no publication ever had before. By 1927, the subscription rate was approaching 200,000 people, and other publications were beginning to imitate its efficient formatting and energetic language, and the naysayers were silenced. To thrive today, news institutions need to raise the bar yet again, becoming more timely, more relevant, more engaging, and even more charismatic. If the story of Time reminds us of anything, it's that refusing to be satisfied with the accepted standard can be the first step towards making something incredibly exciting. And our generation has the capacity to invent a better future for those who come after us. We've had the privilege of strong educations. The wealth of the world's information is accessible to us from devices literally in the palm of our hands. But most importantly, our generation has a unique spirit of curiosity and responsibility that we must embrace. And whether your interest is in new technologies, social media, news and information, or still something else, the clarion call of our time, as it has been for decades past, is to refuse to accept the status quo as good enough and to think, dream, and act audaciously. That's the only way progress will be made. Thank you.
See how this works.
So I'm happy to answer questions about anything that's on your mind. Facebook, Obama, news, New Republic. I'm an open book.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Are you optimistic that in 20, 40, 60 years, we'll have a cadre of the people who can write this material, as well as, you know, the people who write it today?
Thank you.
I take it from the question, your fear is that we won't. I am. I think what it means to what it means to write well 50 years from now will be different than just as it's very different from reading something that was written 50 years ago today, or even 100 years ago. I think what it means to write well is an evolving part of our culture. But at least in our case, the New Republic, I mean, we have significantly expanded our staff and are constantly in the process of finding great talent. And I am in awe of the number of bright, intelligent, smart, thoughtful people who want to be journalists, who are fantastic writers, and who want to do it for a living. think what we've seen in the industry is that so many of these people, unfortunately, because there aren't enough entry-level jobs, have to spend time freelancing to refine and improve their skills, which is for many of them a way to to create clips, to get some experience, and a bridge to actually finding a staff position. But in terms of the quality that we have now, and it seems like to me the direction that we're headed, I think if anything, there's too much great writing on the web in 2014 for any one of us in particular to consume. And so I hope that continues to be the case, but I think that the curve is definitely for more of that writing. That's not to say that there aren't lots of cat videos and numbered lists. I think the conventional wisdom is that we got to have one or we got to have the other. But at least in my view is we have both. And what we need to do is create institutions that support the kind of smart, thoughtful journalism that a lot of us care about, and understand that cat videos and numbered lists and fun things on the internet are a great and important part of it, and don't come at the expense of the smart journalism that's out there as well.
My question is about entrepreneurship and innovation and concerns WhatsApp. I was baffled by the announcement of the transaction. I still don't understand it, but obviously a lot of smart people made the decision to do that deal. So I wonder if you could spend a moment and explain the logic of that and how it ties in with your ideas about technology and innovation and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can speak for myself. So I have no formal affiliation with Facebook and not a spokesperson for them anymore. I'm still friends with many of the people over there. But I haven't spoken with any of them specifically about WhatsApp, so this is very much just my own personal opinion. I think that it's a very difficult time to value startups and emerging companies. And the reason is WhatsApp in many cases is a perfect example. 2-3 years ago, WhatsApp didn't exist, and today it has 500 million users, adding 1 million people per day to the service with a team of 50. And so the idea that they have had any kind of time to build out a business model or any kind of sustainable business is I mean, you see just in the bare numbers that they have found a product that is so successful and growing so quickly that it's hard to even imagine what that trajectory must feel like. And so as a result, whether it's an acquirer, like in Facebook's case, or the open market, you have to start asking yourself, okay, so how do we value these companies? And I think that there's sort of two main approaches. One is more of a traditional approach, which is you open up the books and you look, they didn't have any revenue last year. They spent a lot of money on their staff, and so by any traditional multiple, the company would be worth, I mean, a few tens of millions of dollars, maybe. And that's like the sort of the formal, official, the traditional way of valuing it. On the other hand, on the other extreme, you just look at people who look at the scale and the achievements that it's been able to make, and you value it on how quickly it grows. And so the WhatsApp transaction is a good example. If you look at it on a per user basis, it was actually priced more cheaply than many of the other acquisitions that Facebook in particular has done and others have done. I don't remember the math exactly, but if you look at it with that hat on, then it looks like a real steal, even though there isn't any meaningful underlying business model to make sense of it. So I think it's a really hard time for the companies and for the markets to value these things, and it's really a question of philosophy that any kind of investor or acquiring partner has to take, and particularly in WhatsApp's case. I mean, Facebook clearly took one of the two of those, but it's not something. I mean, there's a good reason why lots of people were surprised at how large the number was.
I think everybody who asks you a question should be part of an older generation. So I'm just noticing this, but but there is one trend that you didn't comment on that I've seen. You've talked about social media delivering news from many different sources and in all parts of our lives. One of the things that I've seen a lot of is people getting their news through social media, but the source is not traditional news media at all. It's individuals, it's people taking videos and so on. So, I mean, just as an example, I'm a Palestine activist, and I can get on Facebook and I can read, you know, something from The Guardian and from Haaretz in Israel, but I can see a video from somebody who's doing a protest in a village in the West Bank. So, and obviously a lot of that type of thing happened during the Arab Spring is probably a good example of that. So what's your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's definitely true. There's so much more content out there. It's hard for anybody to make sense of what's real, what's verifiable, what's believable. We were having a conversation a little bit earlier at dinner about general media literacy and whether it has changed over the course of generations. And we had a little bit of a disagreement. There are some folks who are of the mind that, you know, people just see what they see on the internet and they believe it. And there's a lot of evidence in that corner. I mean, you think about the Obama emails from back in 2008, where everyone, you know, 20% of voters for a period thought he was a Muslim because there was the spam emails were sent all around. That continued with the birther movement, although in a little bit of a different form. But on the other hand, you know, you have a generation of people who came up in the world of social media and who I think have a very innate ability to understand this comes from an institution, this comes from a person. What's that person's context? What is this institution's bias? And so I generally fall on the side that because there's so much information, we have to be savvier about understanding what's real and what's not real. I'm hopeful that we can cultivate that. I'm very much a big proponent and supporter of digital literacy, media literacy programs that can help, you know, teach students, middle school, high school, and help them understand that just because you read it on Wikipedia does not necessarily mean that that it's true. The second thing that I would expect to see over the next few years, and I think we're already seeing, are the emergence of new kinds of technologies which can validate the authenticity of a video, for instance, from a protest. Was it actually taken on a certain day? Was it actually taken in a certain location? And without that sort of stamp of you know, time and place on it, news institutions not necessarily being willing to either believe it or cite it or what have you. So the videos, I mean, will continue to exist. People will be able to Photoshop photos. This is the reality that we live in. But I expect that we'll see emergence of validating technologies that help us separate fact from fiction.
Hello. Oh, okay. I didn't know how close I should get. What's your take, like, at a time when you have people like Peter Thiel saying, like, kids shouldn't go to college, and other people saying, oh, you have to go to college? So, like, I just wonder what your take on that was. Kind of a loaded question, given the sudden.
Yeah. I stayed in college. So I had a unique experience. We started Facebook my sophomore year, and I was on significant financial aid and was also the first in my family to go to a school like Harvard. And so I'd also taken a lot of credits my first 2 years, so I had many fewer that I needed to take at the end. And so I did this sort of crazy dance at the time of being in Cambridge a couple days a week or a week or two, and then going to California for a couple days. More so my senior year than my junior. And at the time, it was very, very schizophrenic. And I was like, why am I staying in school? This is crazy. In retrospect, what I would say is the exact opposite of what Peter would say. And Peter's a friend, and we argue about these things all the time. So I have a lot of respect for him. But I think college is such a unique period in anyone's life that it's so important to spend that time thinking big, making many connections, making many new friends, and also enjoying the intellectual freedom that you have, because it is so hard to recapture that at any other point in your life. I mean, as soon as you enter, you know, many of you work and take classes at the same time, but as soon as you enter the full-time workforce or even more, the days become so regimented, and the work that you're doing oftentimes is always in pursuit of a certain goal, that you don't have that petri dish. You don't have that environment where you're always encountering new ideas, where you're having new conversations, and where you have the license to fail. And you have the license to try something new, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that you lose your job. So I think that college is an incredibly important time, not only for what you learn while you're in classes, but for the opportunities it gets to stretch your muscles, to think big, and try out new things. So I say, stay in as long as you can.
Yeah. Thank you. Today I picked up an optimistic side of your vision about the ways in which new media can enrich American democracy. And I'm trying to put the picture you put today together with some of the concerns that you've raised and participated in with campaign finance reform, and the ways in which some people might be getting their message out over others, and that we live at a time where a lot of people feel disenfranchised and degraded. And so my question for you is two questions: is why have you decided to put so much emphasis on campaign finance reform? Why do you think that's important in the internet age for enriching American democracy? And the second one is, what needs to happen? How do we need to restructure the way people think about the internet so that those whose voices aren't heard can really participate as multimedia citizens?
I think it's a great question. I think after Citizens United, I think there's a growing sense in our country that special interests and corporations in particular have an outsized effect on how our politics works. And I think at the base of that is the fact that we have a campaign finance system which is incredibly complex in terms of the amounts of money that can be given to candidates, the types of groups, there are C4s and PACs and super PACs that can exist outside of them. And it's just an alphabet soup of so many different institutions and so many different interests that can participate. It's honestly a mess, and I'm very much a proponent of meaningful reform. At the same time, we have a system that we have today, and we have to figure out how to work within that to change it and to actually make for a more democratic and more just country. And so, I think unfortunately there's not a lot of easy answers to this because of a lot of the decisions that the Supreme Court has made and the way that the laws are structured on a federal and a state level. But I think it's an incredibly important thing to be working on. My hope is that journalism in particular can continue to play a powerful role in holding politicians and the powerful, whomever on the left, on the right, in the center, everywhere, accountable in the work that they do. In the moments when we have so much more money being spent on elections and on television ads and all of these things, I think journalism has an even more important role to play as an arbiter of what's true and what's false and what's fair or what's unfair. So it's the reason that I do what I do.
Thank you for coming here and talking. My question is about the business model for long-form journalism.
Yes.
In the new media. I came in here tonight, and this is my view, that on the one hand, a good part of new media are books, that books are still something people will spend money for, buy them, even if inexpensively, even if secondhand, but they will buy them. But it just seems that part of the brave new media world is that information, especially long-form journalism or other kinds, is free. And so is it huge page views get advertising, or is there another part of that?
So I'll speak somewhat narrowly to our case because I think it really depends on the different kinds of media companies that are out there. So what we've found is that if you can corner a premium market, if you will, of readers and consumers of the news product, then it's possible to monetize that core asset in digital advertising revenue much more easily than in print revenue. So the consumer desire for print products in the magazine space, I know I'm giving lots of caveats, but it really is different for magazines than it is for newspapers. The consumer demand for print magazines is actually constant, if not slightly higher. You know, the Economist, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, these are all at record or near record highs in their total circulation, and for the most part at higher prices than they've been in the past. The desire for print advertising pages is like this. It's you know, we could go through some of the stats, but it's just completely collapsed. And so as a result, that's the germ of the problem. That's the problem of the business model for a lot of these traditional institutions. So for us, we still have a print product that we publish 20 times a year. I'm super proud of it. It's sort of like our premium thing for the most dedicated of our readers. Just shy of 50,000 people read us in print, but just over 3 million people read us digitally. And so for us, when we talk about our business model, we focus, we tend to lead with the digital products that we offer. And the digital advertising market is still growing slightly. The mobile advertising market is taking off really meaningfully, which is fortunate for companies that can adapt to mobile. About 30% of our traffic now is actually on mobile devices. So I'm giving you a very long-winded answer to the fact that I do believe that there's a business model to sustain the kind of, you know, long-form quality journalism that we do. It's largely rooted in the kind of people who want to read it, and they remain a desired market for a lot of brand awareness advertisers. It's not going to be, you know, no one. I mean, the New Republic's a double bottom line business. I do it because I love the journalism. I think it's incredibly important. I also do it because I think it can be a strong, profitable business that can be self-sustaining. I think that's the best thing for the institution. And there's a route for us to get there. I mean, the Atlantic has made great strides and has been a leader in the field. And so hopefully we can follow in their footsteps and invent some things on our own, which we've already started doing that can get us to a point where we're making money and producing the kind of great journalism that we want to do.
Thank you.
Hi. I see the new media and I find it so polarizing. And I have my views that are on one side of the aisle, but I like to have my ideas challenged. And it's hard to know where to go, because even the cover of the New Republic that we saw tonight was divisive. You know, you'd go there to get your opinion reinforced, but I do like to have some opportunities to change my attitudes a little bit.
We took on the left and right, so you should see our couple covers before.
I will.
So.
I'll take a look, but I really would like to see more of that, challenging all of us to come together and see where we have a dialogue.
I totally agree, and it gets to the point of I think one of the big problems with a lot of the more choice that we have, the more that people just naturally sort of gravitate towards things that reflect their views. But then there's obviously there's lots of people like you, I'm sure, like many of the people in this room, and like me, who want to feel like we're not always reading things that are, you know, just saying yes, yes, yes. Your opinions are right. We want to be challenged, and that's what I feel like we have to cultivate as a culture. I think that's like quite literally what needs to be in the curriculum of classrooms in middle schools and high schools, so that people are aware of their natural affinity for things that reflect their views, but also can create practices and habits that help them seek out other things.
All right. In regards to history, is the ability to change a story at the drop of an edit or delete like problem facing new media?
Say that one more time.
The ability to change a story at the drop of an edit/delete button, is that a new problem facing the new media?
You know, there's this unique culture across blogs and traditional media that's been taken over, or brought over, I should say, from the print world, where once something is up on the web, when there are changes to it, whether you're talking about a blog or the New Republic or the New York Times, they tend to all be made clear, either in notes at the end, or in some cases it's struck through. So I feel like there's still obviously lots of editing that happens before people hit that publish button, but
what I'm talking about is like editing after the fact. Like you see a story that's 5-10 years on, and you realize, hey, this isn't exactly what we wanted to say. This isn't exactly what we wanted to show.
Yeah.
Is there any way could that be a huge problem facing new media, since this is just the internet right now and we don't have it like.
In theory, absolutely. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm surprised. I'm totally with you. I would imagine that would be a bigger problem than it is, but I'm surprised by the internet culture that's emerged. It's been pretty self-accountable, but who knows what could happen in 10 years. I mean, that's fortunately there are some of these services that like the Wayback Machine. There are a few services that actually take a snapshot of what something looks like and enable you to go back in time to see it at a later point. So even if people did try to change it, there's like a snapshot. But in theory, yeah, that could be an issue. Yeah.
This is our last question.
Hi. Thank you for tonight. It was great. You addressed tonight the web and how a lot of us younger journalists or people in college or up and coming, we want to be there. We're looking at we're sifting through the information. But I would love for you to speak a little bit on how a more seasoned audience who is not going to the web and is still watching cable news networks, how that fits into your new media world. And how do we kind of solve this issue of partisan cable news networks? Where does that fit?
That is one I don't have a good answer to. I mean, I think it goes back to the problem that we were discussing before. I mean, the proliferation of the cable channels, I think, has enabled people who want to hear just one side to go to, Fox or MSNBC or wherever, and CNN is, stuck in the middle, has seen their ratings actually meaningfully decrease. So I think that there's still a cultural role that we have to play to. I don't think that there's any sort of market force, let's put it that way, that can come in and change that. I mean, we like to think of ourselves as the CNN or the New York Times as comparable outlets where we have people on the left and where we have people on the right. And I'm sure lots of people on the right will tell you that we're left, just like lots of Fox News viewers will tell you CNN is totally biased. I mean, there's so many different perspectives in the world of media, which I think has been a very contentious one for a long time. But as there's more sources for news and there's more information, I see people going into niches unless we take it on as a responsibility, listening to different opinions and people on other sides.
Let's thank Chris Hughes for coming tonight.
Thank you, guys.